Good morning, Grace Kids. Here we are again, getting to talk about prayer. We've learned that prayer is like a great exchange where we give God all of our thoughts and feelings, and He gives us His in return. We've learned that maybe it seems a little bit strange at first, but once we start doing it, once we get into the routine, then it becomes a habit and it's not so weird anymore. And we've learned that we can talk to God in either whatever comes to our minds or by following a pattern. Whatever we do, we know that we can tell God anything and everything. Have you ever wondered about how it is that God talks to us and how we might hear Him? Well, that is what we're going to talk about today. Remember our experiment a few weeks ago where we had the speaker and the bowl with the tissue papers on top and the sound waves played and they made the tissues dance? Well, that is how God spoke to men before Jesus. He would send His sound waves out, the men would hear His voice, and boy, would they move. And then when Jesus came along, He was able to have conversations like you and I do, where we get to talk to each other and our sound waves go from one to the other. But with the Spirit inside of us, it's a little bit different, and we don't necessarily hear God's voice in the same way, but we have to listen to Him just a little bit differently. I want you to watch the experiment again, and let's see if you can notice the difference. Did you notice what was different? You couldn't hear the sound, could you? But you could still see the tissues move on the bowl, right? Well, that is exactly how God talks to us and how we hear Him. We may not hear His voice, but we sure know when He's moving us. And what I want you to know, what I want you to remember, is that God's voice will always move us towards love. Because He's love, that's exactly where it will move us to. So what we need to do is we need to learn to pay attention to what God is saying to us and to know what kinds of things God is going to say to us. When we are trying to hear from God, when we're listening for what He wants to say to us, we're going to have to do it without our ears, but with our hearts and our minds. And so we need to pay really close attention. And that might mean sometimes being still and quiet, maybe even closing our eyes so that we can block out all of the distractions. Sometimes we may not be able to sit still or close our eyes, and we can instead just take a deep breath and listen for what God is trying to say to us. And here's a few examples of how God's voice might move us towards love. When we tell Him all about how we're afraid or we're nervous about something, His voice, He will move us towards bravery. When we talk to God maybe about how lonely we are or how we wish we had a good friend, His voice will remind us that we have such a great friend in Him. And this is awesome. When we talk to God about how happy we are and how much joy we have in our life, guess what His voice does? His voice reminds us that we have even more joy than we can possibly imagine. So guys, talk to God, listen to Him. There's so much you can tell Him, and there's so much He wants to tell you. And if nothing else, I want you to remember that He's telling you He loves you. And so do I, and I'll see you next time.